Good evening and welcome to Imperial Lates Online Healthcare Heroes, the latest week-long celebration and exploration of research at Imperial. My name is James and I work in the public engagement team here at the college. This week's Lates programme features a number of guests who work inside or with our healthcare system in various guises and roles. Tonight we're going to be speaking to some of its newest recruits who this summer were voluntarily thrust into the centre of one of the greatest challenges faced by the NHS in its history. At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, hundreds of recently graduated Imperial Medicine students were given the opportunity to bring forward their first placement in order to help overstretched wards in some of our worst hit hospitals. Tonight, we're joined by three of these newly qualified doctors who have very kindly taken time out from their shift patterns to share accounts of what they saw, what they learnt, and how the experience affected them personally. Whilst I certainly have a lot of questions, and we've had some really nice ones sent through by some people in advance as they were registering, I wanted to remind you all watching live at home that this is an interactive event. So please do send us your questions and queries and comments. My colleagues, Holly and Maeve, they're working away in the background, monitoring the YouTube chat, and will be passing on your comments to me to read out or put to our guests. Could I just ask everyone to be considerate of each other when you are posting? We want to create a welcoming space for this online conversation. So whilst we love passion, enthusiasm and honesty, let's avoid anything that disrupts the experience for others. So, if that's all understood, let's meet our doctors. Joining us tonight are Gargi Samath, Charlene Koza, and Kwarteng Safo. Thank you so much to all three of you for joining us. To help introduce yourself to our audience and to kick things off, I'm going to come to each of you and ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself. And in doing so, give us a sense of what your first reaction was to when you were offered the opportunity to bring your graduation forward and start working on the wards during what was at the time already a huge sort of global pandemic. I wondered, maybe Gargi, can I come to you first?
Sure, yeah. So hi everyone, thanks for joining tonight. My name's Gargi. I'm currently a doctor working in Southampton. I graduated from Imperial this year in March, and following that I worked in hospitals in northwest London as an interim foundation doctor in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I suppose when we were sitting our finals at the end of final year, we had no idea how the rest of the year was going to turn out. I think we all had plans on traveling the world after finishing medical school, and understandably discovering that the world was sort of taken by an international pandemic, it was quite shocking actually, and quite scary. And I suppose when we first found out that we were allowed to start work early as foundation doctors, it was a little bit scary because we were sort of starting in our jobs 3 months before any of us had imagined. But I think we sort of took the challenge on board in the best way possible and tried to help the national efforts as much as we could.
Brilliant, thank you. Charlene, do you want to go next?
I'm Charlene, and I am an F1 doctor working in Salisbury. And like Yagi said, when we first heard that we were allowed to graduate early, I think it was for me, it was exciting because I was really keen and eager to get back onto the wards, because having been at home studying for finals and everything, I really missed helping and working with patients. And so when the opportunity came to do something that would help other people, I was eager to go, but I was also quite nervous to see what it would be like.
Brilliant. And Kwarteng, if I could come to you lastly.
Hello everyone, my name is Kwarteng Safo. I am a doctor in Essex. In terms of my thoughts and feelings when I was told to, given this opportunity to work as a junior doctor during the COVID period, I was apprehensive. I think putting into practice what you've learned over a 6-year course can be scary. And in normal times, you would have the 3 months or so to prepare yourself adequately for starting as a junior doctor. So to be told that, you have this opportunity to start immediately, it was scary. But at the same time, I was quite excited because I thought this is it. This basically was an epitome of what I've worked for over the last 6 years.
So just to pick up on that, Kwarteng, paint us a picture. So you were sitting your finals, then what was how long before you were notified that there might be an opportunity to start work? And then what was the process before you started your first shift? Was it in Essex? I'm not sure. But how long before your first shift?
So essentially, when I was sitting for my finals, I was volunteering at the same time, helping out with logistics in a hospital in central London. Following our last exam, I think it was roughly a week or two, when we were given the opportunity to actually start becoming a junior doctor, essentially. And when that opportunity came about, I was also going to be based in central London as well. So it was an environment that was pretty much familiar to majority of us who were at Imperial, because those were the hospitals that we had been based at. But the process was really scary. So luckily enough, Imperial were, we were so grateful for Imperial because they placed us in a accommodation that was very, very helpful during that period of time, and it helped us prepare adequately for working in the hospitals. But once we got there, that's when reality kind of sunk in, and we're like, oh wow, we're actually here now. We're actually going to practice the medicine that we've been studying for the past 6 years. And it was scary. As I said before, it was exciting meeting new people, and seeing you give back to the community during a time that they were struggling. So yeah, really liked it.
Brilliant. Charlie and Gagi, does that sound familiar to you? Was there any differences from your own experience?
No, it's a pretty similar experience, actually. It all happened rather quickly, is the one thing I can remember. The process from sitting finals and the uncertainty of how we're even going to do that in the first place, to then finishing exams, to then being told actually you can start, and then starting, all happened really quickly. And for me, it almost felt as if it wasn't really time to second guess yourself. You just made a decision and went with it.
I think I would echo that. It was just really surreal how quickly things happened. Like one day we were revising for our finals. We hadn't left the library in weeks. The next day we see Matt Hancock live on TV telling us that lots of junior doctors are heading to the front line very soon. And then the following week, we find out that our finals, the practical component has been cancelled, which is literally unheard of in medical school. It never happens. I think at that point, it probably hit us that this is something really big and it's getting quite serious. And I think the time between finishing finals and beginning work or volunteering, me and Charlene started volunteering at one of the hospitals in London, literally 3 days after doing our final written exam, because they really needed people on board. And I think it was just crazy for us how quickly things moved, that we didn't really get time to take in anything that was really going on.
I wonder if, in a sense, was that beneficial? So we had a question from Rhoda who sent a question in about, did you worry when you were in this process of making this decision? Did you worry about your safety? I don't know, Gagi, did that in that 3-day period, did that come into your thinking at all?
3 days is a very short time to worry about anything, really. I think I was more worried about making sure that my firm's clothes, my hospital clothes rather, were ready for starting work. I don't think we really had any concerns about our safety before starting. Obviously, there was lots in the media at the time. It was an absolute frenzy. But personally, I wouldn't say I was worried about my safety before starting.
Yeah, I would agree to that as well, actually, because I think being a doctor or working, studying for medicine, you kind of are able to distinguish between, as Gagi said, media frenzy to what it actually is like. And it's part and parcel of being a doctor. So when we are, put into that environment, although we had a couple of days to think about it, COVID itself was never something that we're like, oh, you know what, maybe I don't want to do this because COVID, because essentially being a doctor is being placed in these kind of situations and helping people at the expense at times of your own health. So it didn't really cross, specifically me, it didn't really cross my mind that, COVID I could possibly infect it or so forth.
Having said that, Imperial did, I think they went and thought about the safety of our families and everybody, and they were able to, organize the accommodation, like Kwate mentioned earlier, where you had all the people who were volunteering, all the people who were doing interim, who needed somewhere in London to stay. So in as much as we weren't worrying about it, they were, and they made sure that that side was organized for us.
That's interesting. Yeah. So Charlene, we had a question from Renya, which was around any extra training, or there's a two-part question about extra training you might have received, or some words of advice that you received ahead of your first shift. Was there anything especially that was laid on, or was there any particular guidance that you were given or tips that you were given that stuck with you?
Oh, I think in terms of special preparation before, I wouldn't say there was much more than we would normally have. What we had was, throughout the time that we're doing interim, they did, catch up educational programs. I felt like there was a teaching session almost every week or every other day, just to make sure that we felt confident in the skills that we're trying to carry out. They refreshed all of our clinical skills, and they were just teaching us more about medicine that is relevant for us to know while we're working on the wards. We also had to do, I think, an online module where they taught us about things that we might see on the wards, dealing with, like, if we were in ITU, how to deal with, like, ventilators and how to deal with all of these things. So I think there was enough preparation throughout the whole entire program.
One of the parts of the story you talked to me about, Gargi, was that one thing that medical students, as they graduate, they have this final year dinner, and it's been a bit of an institution. That obviously wasn't. That didn't quite happen as planned. I think we've got a picture of that. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, maybe that was something that you lost out from.
Yeah. So at Imperial, at the end of final year, there's a dinner called the Shrove Tuesday Final Year Dinner, which is an absolute tradition. It's happened throughout World War II. It's never been cancelled in its 80-year history. Obviously, as a result of COVID, it was one of the things that, for us, got cancelled. But given that we are in the age of technology, a group of us from our year put together a virtual final year dinner where we had the student speeches and the faculty speeches video recorded. And then this is me in my flat with 3 of my housemates who are also final year medics, watching our final year dinner speeches sitting on the floor, which obviously isn't the glitzy and glamorous occasion that you want it to be, but given the circumstances, it was still a really touching moment, and it was still a special occasion for us.
Great. We've had a couple of questions in already. So there's a question come in from Arya, which is on what steps or duties were you asked to do at the earliest when people only, I guess, didn't know much about the virus. It was a slightly different time when you were entering your first shift. At the time, how much information could they give you about the realities of what COVID's going to mean and what the best procedures will be for dealing with patients? And has that changed? Has that guidance and information changed as you've gone on?
I think perhaps what was different, a large proportion of our work as a junior doctor during COVID was, I would say, pretty much the same in terms of seeing patients, doing the ward rounds and carrying out jobs. I mean, in terms of the actual safety aspects, donning gloves, wearing masks, that was something that was new to us, something that we hadn't experienced before. So it was very, it was a new experience, and getting used to it was quite difficult because, normally we'd walk on the wards, not having to put on masks, obviously you don on your gloves, but pretty much everything was slightly different when you were interacting with patients. I think specifically with the hospital that I was working at, one thing that we did introduce was a VR headset. So our consultant would actually don or put on the VR headset and walk into the wards, whilst the junior doctors and other doctors who are on the team would be in the office interacting with the doctor as he or she spoke with the patient, and then essentially we'll be making notes and carrying out jobs or making a jobs list of what's needed for the rest of the day. So I think you could see the implementation of technology within that COVID period, and I think it was really nice to see how the NHS adapted to the changing environment.
Great. I wanted to sort of move. So we've covered some of your, I guess, preconceptions of and the changes in that you experienced in terms of your graduation. I guess it's taking us into those first shifts. it'd be good to give people a flavour of what those first shifts actually looked like and what your role as a sort of a newly qualified doctor was. I guess, particularly in how it might differ. I don't know if it differed at all. I guess from what a newly qualified doctor would have experienced at another time, not during the centre of a global pandemic. Charlene, is there anything? How would you describe those first shifts in terms of the sort of duties you were doing, and is that typical of a newly qualified doctor?
I think in terms of the duties are pretty similar, where, like Watting said, preparing lists, seeing patients, and reviewing the stable patients. When we started, they were quite strict about where it is we could work and who we can work with, and we started at a time when the previous F1s were still on the ward, so we were working alongside them, which I guess is the most significant difference to how things were in August when we started properly. And so we were just not really on our own, so we were seeing patients alongside the rest of the team, and it just felt very supported, really. There are just so many people around. Despite this, I was still very, very nervous. I didn't know what to expect. Because there's so much in the media about what hospitals are like, and having spent some time volunteering, like I said, in the hospitals, it was kind of difficult to know exactly what it was like, because I did my interim at a different hospital that I volunteered from, so I just didn't know what each day was going to be like. But as the days went on, I guess just got more comfortable and just got on with the job, really. Just did what I have been doing, albeit a bit more stressful situation than normal, and with possibly a greater turnover of patients than we used to. But all in all, it was doing the same thing, really.
I think we've got some pictures of Charlene and Gagi you sent through of some of you in some of those initial either voluntary work or some of those shifts. I don't know, Holly, if you can bring those up. Maybe one of you could tell us what we're looking at here. So this is you, Gagi, stacking shelves.
This isn't actually me during my shift. This is me volunteering before starting as a doctor. So me and Charlene were working in PPE distribution for one of the hospitals in North London. And that, Charlene, I think you'll agree, was an exceptional experience. We really got to know the hospital really, really well. We sort of had our hand at sort of working out logistics, like managing people's expectations. And I think we really had sort of a hands-on approach to just understanding what was going on the shop floor, which was, for me, amazing. Charlene, what do you think?
I thought it was a wonderful insight to how the hospital works, really. Because normally you say, oh, we need more of this, and it's just there. But actually being the people who bring things through. And also, it kind of brought everything to, I don't know, it made everything a bit more real. Because you'd hear reports about, oh, there isn't this and there isn't that, but actually you're the ones delivering it to the ward. So you actually know what's there, what's present. And so we're able to talk to the staff and reassure them and actually let them know that they are being looked after and that everything is under control.
Okay. Yeah. Because of the sort of the work-life balance during that time, because I mean that.
I think James has just fallen out, but he was talking about the work-life balance.
Yes.
Who wants to answer that one? He wants to tell some stories.
Sorry, you might, James, you might have cut off during that period.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry, my question was around the sort of the work-life balance during those initial months. I know that some of you were living exclusively with people, junior doctors in a similar position. I was just inviting anyone to tell any stories or to give us a flavour of what it was like living in that bubble. I guess a very unique bubble.
I think one of the greatest benefits of working as a junior doctor for Imperial during that COVID period was the fact that you could come home and see familiar faces, see your friends who you've been with for the past 6 years, and being able to de-stress knowing that you both share the same experience. I think in terms of balancing work and play, it was definitely manageable because when you finished work, and when you came home, you are surrounded by loving people who you were, familiar with, and you could talk about how the day went. You could go out and, I don't know, go for a jog because exercise was a new thing during COVID period. You could just engage and talk to each other. And I think that aspect, it really helped being a junior doctor during that period of time. And it's something that is very difficult to achieve when you're in a completely new hospital in a completely new environment. It feels like you're by yourself. But during that period of COVID, and the fact that we had accommodation set up by Imperial, it was really lovely to come home and, interact with other people and just have fun there.
I totally agree. Like, I was living with 3 of my best friends from medical school during interim F1, and it was honestly an amazing time because you could come home and then just de-stress and debrief with your friends. Like, we do dinner together literally every day. Someone would inevitably finish late, but someone else would have cooked, so like you'd sort of have it together. And I think it was just really nice to have literally like your best support network with you when you're starting one of the most terrifying jobs that you're ever going to start. And I think that was really special for us because, like Kwarteng said, we would have been on our own in some random part of the country otherwise. And I think we're really privileged to have that. And, we had a good 3 months.
I think we've got a picture from you, Charlene, which Holly can put up now, which certainly shows some, a solid looking team of people. I don't know if these are people you were living with at the time or who's in these photographs.
So the photo on the left shows myself and 2 other interim F1s, one who also lived in the accommodation, the other who didn't. And the one on the right is also some other people that I worked with. And it's just, I guess, in between seeing patients and in between doing that, we had time to really just de-stress and talk and just be normal, if that makes sense. Because it felt like the world turned upside down, and being able to talk about like normal things and also catch up on how everyone else's day went was just a really nice experience. It helped make the whole thing a bit more bearable, really. And I think for me, it was the most important part of that whole entire time. I think there are some experiences that were so difficult for me that I wouldn't have been able to go through were it not for my friends and the people that I lived with at that time.
Brilliant. Dragging you, unfortunately, back to the wards or back to the hospital, we had a question from Roshan who's asked, how was working in the wards and ITU with the extra safety measures in PPE and the change in communication between patient and doctor? So, I guess you wouldn't have trained necessarily, well, you might have trained with more of a face-to-face engagement with patients. I'm not sure. Gargi, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, of course. So as part of our interim, we weren't actually in ITU, but obviously we were hearing what was the sort of things that people in ITU were going through. But just from my experience in the ward, just having to go through wearing a lot of PPE to going to sort of go and see and assess patients was a completely new experience because it was just it was a lot more serious during the time that we were working, and that you absolutely had to make sure that you were protecting yourself before you were going in to see a patient that was positive. And regarding the communication, I think it was actually really challenging to communicate with patients when you're wearing a mask. Like, they're literally seeing like your eyes and nothing else. Like you've lost half of your non-verbal communication skill set. And particularly when there's a patient who is really unwell, they're going through a really tough time, they might be dying. It is really, really hard to communicate with them and to empathize with them and make them feel better when you're so sort of covered up. But that's sort of what we had to do. And also what made it quite challenging for the patients, particularly the unwell ones, was the fact that visitation rights to the hospital were severely restricted. So essentially no visitors were allowed. And for us, that was a whole new sort of domain because you always have patients' families around, they have their support network, they have people visiting them every day, and they're now sort of ill and isolated, and you need to take on more responsibility in just making sure that that we were appropriately communicating with their families and that we were helping them feel at ease as best as we could given the circumstances.
Great. Kwarteng, we had a question coming from Philomena, which was, again, it's a slightly two-part question. So she asks about, did you feel that all the equipment you needed, but also the counselling you needed were available to you? So I guess there's emotional support as well as the sort of physical stuff that you would need to do your job. What were on either of those or both of those? What are your sort of thoughts on that?
I think that's a really good question. And it's really important because we tend to focus on the physical aspects of medicine and, forget the mind aspect as well. In terms of the physical requirements that we needed whilst we were working, I think we were in a position where we received the necessary equipment. And before we actually started work in the hospitals, the hospital managerial teams made sure that, those equipments were there so that we weren't put in a possible situation where we could have, caught COVID ourselves. In terms of the mind aspect, I think it was a very difficult situation because it's something that the hospital hadn't been, used to, and therefore couldn't have put things in place quick enough to help us. Well, one thing that they did do was that they allowed us to have free access to apps such as Headspace, and other apps that I can't remember the names of, which actually helped us in terms of, de-stressing, in terms of taking care of our mental, but as well having friends around and being able to talk to them about situations which we were all going through also helped in terms of making sure that our mental state of mind was at ease.
Great. Is there anything, Gargi or Charlene, is there anything you want to add to that, or do you feel that's a fair summary?
Yeah, I think it's a fair summary.
Yeah, I think it's very fair.
Great. In terms of, because this pandemic didn't exist in isolation. There was you guys inadvertently or not, you were in the center of the biggest media news story of the year, or often the only news story that was taking up the whole of the 10 o'clock news. Were you aware? How aware were you? Bearing in mind that you're working in the hospital and some of you were going back to living with other doctors in the same place. How aware were you of this sort of the news agenda, and how did that influence you or affect you or get you thinking in any particular way? Charlene?
I think at first I was really religiously tuning into the news to see what's happening. Then after a while, when I started working, I actually thought it would be best for my own well-being just to tune it out, because of the reality that I was seeing. I didn't need any extra stress from the media, any extra, crazy stories that were coming up. And I think for me personally, that was the best thing that I did. And I'd occasionally tune in to find out, see if there's anything that was significant that had happened. But not as much as, I would have done at the beginning, daily sitting into the briefings to see what's happening and all of those stories. I think the one time that I stayed close to the media was when obviously we had the government reports coming out. And that's when I started to pay more attention and start looking to see how does this affect me in my practice.
Gargi or Kwarteng, is that were you religiously watching the news, or did it help just to tune it out and concentrate on your jobs and I guess concentrate on your own sort of well-being during that time?
I think during our exams, when we had no idea what was going on and everything was uncertain, definitely I was tuning into the news. But once I started working, I was getting enough news from the hospital that I didn't really need more on top of it. So I completely sort of tuned out the news when I started working. Like Charlene said, it was just better that way.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you definitely got more news on the walls and usually firsthand, quicker than the news sites or, Channel 4s and BBCs would, get that information. So you were quite informed and you were able to make decisions based on that information that you received.
Great. I want to move as we come towards the end. So we've still got 15 minutes or so. So please, if you haven't submitted a question or a comment onto the YouTube chat, please do. We'll try and read them all out. I wanted to sort of end, or the final section of this, to get a bit reflective and have a think about how this is, what had the sort of long-lasting impact this might have on you guys as doctors, as people. So we had to kick off. We had a question from Nicolina who's asked: is there something different that you would have done or could have done differently if it hadn't been for the COVID-19 situation? I guess Gargi, you talked about going travelling, but in terms of that first placement, how could it have been different, or would it have been different if your first sort of professional experience on the wards it hadn't taken place during a global pandemic?
So I suppose had we not started working in a pandemic, the support on the ward would have been a lot less, I think, when we started, because our other F1s were also there. They'd been doing the job for a whole year. They basically took us on board and became our mentors and taught us everything that we needed to do the day-to-day job, and that was incredible. And had we started in normal terms in August, that support is sometimes not there. And you're very much sort of on your own, expected to be an F1 from day one, where you didn't necessarily know how to do things appropriately. But here we had so much support that it was sort of unreal to have like training wheels on before actually starting work as a doctor properly.
Does that, I mean, Kwarteng or Charlene, was that a benefit? It sounds like it was a benefit, in very unfortunate circumstances that you would never want to repeat. But in the context of your sort of training and professional development, there was some benefits to that. Does that suggest something around longer term resources that are available to give people? Would you encourage future junior doctors to have similar levels of support in their first shifts, their first rounds that they're doing?
I think this pandemic has really shown the areas in which universities, hospitals can improve in terms of preparing foundation doctors ready for their placements when they start in August. Because during this pandemic, there was so much teaching online. Literally every single day had some sort of teaching that was relevant to working as a junior doctor, to the point where you didn't even know what to tune in. You had some that were overlapping and so forth. So I think if hospitals adapt a similar process in helping foundation doctors prepare before they even get on the wards or before they have their first day, they will be in a much better position to start. Because luckily for us, we have done the F1 job for 3 months before we actually started in August. So I think if future generations or future F1s are able to have that opportunity, then they will be in a much better place to deal with things on the ward.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Charlene, we had a question from Siobhan about has the pandemic affect and the NHS's has the pandemic and the response to it affected how you feel about the NHS? I don't know if you can articulate that.
I think. Okay, let's start. For my initial thoughts about the NHS, so I guess it was an organisation that I knew I was going to start and join, and the understanding has always been it can be difficult for change to come about. But having seen, I think, the whole entire NHS just move so quickly and adapt to new information has shown me that change is possible. And I feel quite positive when I think about my future career, and that if there are things that need to adapt and to change, then I know that it is possible. And hopefully in future, we won't need something so drastic as a pandemic to lead to change. But it just shows that there's potential. And I guess in a way, that's what's changed about my opinion about the NHS. And I've also, I'm more proud of working in the NHS, really. The one thing I was really happy about, I was able to be in a place that I can help people who need it, really. And it's just there, available for everybody who needs it.
We had a question from Janet, who's asked about whether COVID has equipped you, or do you feel that COVID might have equipped you or with a different skill set, or given you an opportunity to practice or enhance certain skills very early on in your sort of professional lives, which you might not have been able to in other circumstances. Gargi, do you feel that might be the case?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think COVID more than anything has taught us amazingly well how to deal with uncertainty. Not knowing if your exam tomorrow is going to be cancelled or not, which you've been revising for 6 months, that prepares you for uncertainty quite well. I think also just being involved in the whole team effort of the NHS in dealing with COVID and tackling COVID, I think it's taught us a lot about resilience and how it's really important to look out for each other and to sort of rely on your team members when you sort of are faced with difficult situations. So yeah, I think it's taught us those two things at a very early stage in our career.
And in terms of Kwarteng, in terms of the type of doctor you might want to be, we had a question from Vicky about whether your thoughts around specialisms or further study or research areas you might explore, have they been affected at all or changed at all by sort of your first professional steps taking place within this sort of pandemic?
I think one thing that this pandemic has taught me in terms of the type of doctor I want to be in the future is essentially one that is empathetic and one that has the non-verbal and verbal communication skill set. Because as Gagi mentioned earlier on, we were put in a situation where the means of which we communicated with patients in the past was very different. And I think being for my future, or what I envision myself to be as a doctor in the future, is one that can change or be malleable according to situations that are presented to me. And number two, being able to find other avenues of communicating to patients to make myself the best doctor, or for the patient to understand what is going on. So I think I would say those are the two key things that I have in mind in terms of what I would like to be as a doctor in the future.
Right. On that theme of the type of doctor you'd like to be within the NHS and things you might sort of campaign for in terms of change. We talked beforehand, Charlene, about one of the other big stories that has happened this year alongside COVID has been the Black Lives Matters movement, and the issue of race within the pandemic and the issue of race within the vulnerability of people from the wider BAME community and the BAME healthcare workers to the pandemic has been that's been part of the news agenda and part of people's thinking alongside this alongside COVID. Did that experiencing it firsthand and as a young Black woman what are your thoughts on that, or how did that feature into your thinking on your way to work or during your shift patterns, or change the type of doctor you might want to be and what sort of change you might like to see within the NHS going forward?
I think it's certainly played a lot on my mind because at the time, that this whole side kicked off, unfortunately, I came down with COVID. And so it was very much on my mind. I was like, how does this affect me? And going forward, how will that change my practice? And I think I had several conversations with some consultants, and they felt as though, the biggest learning point from this is that we actually need to amplify the voices of people who aren't otherwise heard, or to speak about the experiences that others may not be aware of. And I think it's an ongoing conversation seen on social media and in the news stories where people are just saying, this is not new. This is something that has been happening for a while. It's just that majority of the population are unaware of it. And I think for me, going forward in my career, I think my aim would be to be a voice for those who don't have a voice, really, and speak about the issues that affect me, as well as the issues that I notice affect other members of the population. And I think we could all do well to do that, actually, because sometimes those who are affected by things aren't able to speak up for themselves. They aren't able to say, oh, I haven't been treated fairly, or I'm not in a position to do this. And it's our job as doctors to be advocates for our patients and advocates for our colleagues who may be, less confident to speak up.
Gagi or Kwarteng, is there anything you'd like to add to those lovely comments from Charlene there?
I think she pretty much summed it really well.
Yeah, I think she smashed it. I think COVID has highlighted some real issues with the NHS in a range of different ways, whether that's in the efficiencies or in the fact that BAME voices are often not heard as loudly as others. And I think it's really great that we've had this refresh, but it's really important that moving forwards, we continue amplifying those voices and pushing for efficiencies.
Great. I'm going to come to our last question now, which has come through from Emma, which is advice you would have for new medical students beginning or continuing their studies in the post-COVID world. So I might finish off by getting all three of you to sort of provide some advice for Emma, and then we'll finish off. So Gagi, maybe I can come to you first.
Yeah, sure. So firstly, Emma, you are getting into a profession which is going to challenge you in so many ways. It's, every single day that you do something, it's going to be completely unpredictable. It's going to be completely different. But you're going to have the chance to touch people's lives in a way which not many other people do, and that is a massive privilege. So enjoy medical school. Although it's hard, it is ultimately worth it in the end. And you'll be changing people's lives and you won't even know it. And that's incredible.
Brilliant. Charlene?
I think my advice is really enjoy every single moment. It may not feel like it's enjoyable, the sitting in the lectures or going to a placement, but they do stand you in good stead when you're later in future and you remember situations. You're like, oh, I've seen this before, I've heard this before. And the other piece of advice is really to have a go at everything and not to be afraid just because you don't know something. Because I think that will be the most useful thing in this post-COVID world where we're not really sure about what's going on, but what's necessary is that you have a go, you try, you put yourself forward, and you'll be surprised.
Brilliant. And Kwarteng, bring us home with some really inspiring words for Emma.
Wow, pressure. I think for Emma, just to remind you that you are capable, you are meant for medicine. At many points during your journey, you will doubt yourself. You will feel like you're an imposter, but you're meant to do this. You're meant to be that doctor that you've envisioned yourself from, when you were young. And you have the brain capabilities. And even if you feel like you don't, you have more than enough support around to help you out. So don't be afraid to try. Don't be afraid to ask for help, and just go and get it.
Wow, that's wonderful. Unfortunately, that brings us to the end of tonight's discussion. So thank you so much, Gargi, Charlene and Kwarteng for joining us. For those watching live on YouTube, apologies if we were unable to get to your questions. A recording of this discussion will soon appear on the college YouTube channel, so you can watch it again and share it with your friends, share it on social media. There's also a link that my colleague Holly, she's going to post the link in the chat to an evaluation form where you can tell us what you thought of the event, and that's really helpful for us to try and improve these events and make them as engaging as possible going forward. But otherwise, that's it from me. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. Thank you to our speakers, and have a wonderful evening, everyone. And do check out the Imperial Lates program, which continues tomorrow night and Thursday. So do keep an eye out for that. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much.